All right. So, as I mentioned a few times before, we're going to be looking in Psalm 37 this morning. Specifically, we're going to be paying attention to verses 1 through 9. And we've already read it for our scripture reading, so it won't take time to go back and read through that. I do want to spend a little more time than normal kind of on some intro stuff. I think first thing just to tell you is, as we read the Psalm this morning, obviously, if you were paying attention and following along, there's so much in here. There's this just a wonderful psalm. It's actually an acrostic in the Hebrew. Every one or two, mainly every two verses, there are a couple, it's just one verse, but start with a different letter of the Hebrew alphabet. So it's a really cool setup. But there, like I said, there's a lot here. And I don't know that I'm biting off more than I can chew, but it's just a lot. And we're gonna breeze through some things. We're gonna look past some things. And to be honest with you, I might struggle on letting a few things go and moving on, just because of everything that's here. But we're gonna do our best this morning. Really, if you pay attention and pay attention to what the Psalm's teaching us, or the main theme of the Psalm, I think the main thing of the Psalm is that we have to live with an eternal mindset in view. That is really kind of the point of this psalm. As you see the things he says, the way David says things, it makes sense. This psalm makes sense when you're keeping the sovereignty of God and the eternality of God and the future kingdom in mind. If you read this psalm with just your temporal eyes, it's going to be really difficult for you to understand and even create potentially some issues for you. But it's one of those things where it's a good reminder. And some of you that have been here a while remember Pastor Bruce uses the term or the example of boxing our compass, of kind of resetting our compass. And I think this psalm is a good psalm to kind of help us reset our compass on the eternal mindset and how we should think about things, especially how we think and view evil in the world, justice in the world, the things that we know in our hearts should be right and they aren't. The other thing that's interesting, and this is a wisdom psalm. If you read it, it sounds a lot more like Proverbs. It actually sounds like it belongs in Proverbs than it does in Psalms. So it's very practical, very prescriptive, and it gives directives in an absolute nature. That's a little bit different than most of the Psalms that you will deal with. And again, like I said, it will challenge those who are living with a temporal view of God's sovereignty and justice. If you're expecting everything to be okay and right here, this psalm is going to be a problem for you. But also this psalm can be an opportunity for you to think right and to, like I said, reset that compass about how we think about and respond to those things. So the purpose of the psalm is to provide a hope for the future, an encouragement for the present, that our striving to live in a godly manner is not in vain, and our experience now is not how it will be ultimately. That there's more to come. There's better to come. So we're going to jump right in here. Verse 1. Technology. All right. Verse 1 and 2 says, "Fret not yourself because of the evildoer. Be not envious of wrongdoers, for they will soon fade like the grass and wither like the green herb." So the first command here is fret not yourself. And this is the first of 3 times it's used in the psalm. We'll actually see all 3 in the first 9 verses. The idea of fret here, the Hebrew word here is the idea to get agitated, to be angry or stirred up to anger. I think a lot of times in modern English, when we think about fret, we think about worry or concern, and that's not what's at the root of this. If I had to put it in our everyday vernacular now, I'd say I would translate it, don't get worked up, if you wanted my New Living Translation version of it. The idea of getting worked up about something is the idea that you're being agitated to some sort of angry response. Anger is at the root of what this word is commanding us not to do. It's not, like I said, just not about being worried or bothered. It's an irritation or an annoyance that provokes or stokes anger within us. And so the anger really is at the issue or the core of your response here. So when he says don't fret, he's not saying don't necessarily worry. He's saying don't be provoked to anger. Don't look at these things and begin to allow yourself to get frustrated or worked up over them. And he says fret not yourself. The implication here is that the decision on whether or not we fret lies with us. And I think that was a good reminder for me to stop and think about even at this point, is that the The ultimate responsibility on whether or not I get into this state of being worked up or being fretful is my responsibility. It doesn't matter what's going on around me. It doesn't matter what I'm seeing. It doesn't matter what's being done to me in terms of, he says, fret not over wrong evildoers or workers of evil. The provocation comes from the workers of evil or evildoers, but the response comes out of my heart. In terms of when I see it, it's my response that matters. I can't control what they do, but I can control how I respond to them. And his command to the call here is that I don't get angry, I don't get upset, I don't get frustrated. And I started to think about that, and I don't remember how many times, but I've let myself off the hook many ways in this. Well, if they wouldn't do that, then I wouldn't be like this. Well, they're acting that way, so that's what's got me all, and we're really easy to kind of let ourselves off the hook here. But what he's saying here is it doesn't matter how other people are responding. You are still the one that is responsible. So one of the first things is we jump right in here in this idea of not fretting or not getting angry about evil and seeing when wicked people get success or take advantage of people, all these things that we will talk about. We have to learn to acknowledge and accept the reality of life. And the reality of life here on earth is, one, evil exists. It's out there. We're going to be faced with it. Those who have an evil nature or those with a fallen nature, they're going to act like it, and they're going to act on it, and they're going to treat people that way. And they're going to leverage evil to their advantage. That's who they are by their nature. And usually many times at the expense of others, sometimes at the expense of our own selves. And so it's one of those first things that if we're going to follow this command, we just have to recognize that as we exist now, as we are in this reality, evil exists. Evil people are going to operate and act in an evil way, and that they're going to leverage evil and selfishness for their own advancement. And Solomon says in Ecclesiastes 5:8, he says, if you see in a province the oppression of the poor and the violation of justice and righteousness, do not be amazed at the matter. He goes on, Ecclesiastes 3:16, 4:1, he makes similar reminders to people that, look, this is the reality that we live in. This shouldn't be surprising to us. And if it shouldn't be surprising to us, we shouldn't be caught off guard. We should be prepared not to allow those things to get us provoked to anger or worked up. 1 Peter 4:2, beloved, do not be surprised at the fiery trials that comes upon you and test you as though something strange was happening to you. This is, again, just the New Testament reminder that this is the world we live in. We're not to be surprised. In John 15:18-27, Jesus reminds the disciples, look, the world is going to hate you. The evil still exists in the world. This is our reality. Our response to it is what matters. We're not going to be able to, ultimately, at the end of the day, it's not our job to deal with evil. It's not our job to hold the evildoer accountable. It's our job to respond properly. And the wrong response is to become angry or frustrated or worked up about it. Not fretting can only be accomplished when we think and live as if the reality of God's final judgment and kingdom is true. God does promise, and we'll get into that. God does promise judgment, but he doesn't promise it here. They will get the evildoer will get what he deserves. And here's the thing about that, as I thought about that. Don't take pleasure in that, because there's two reasons why. Or one is, it's way worse than we could ever hope for them. When you see the evildoer, when we see evil happening, and we see people taking advantage of people, and we see that going on in this world, don't for one second think that somehow don't look forward to their destruction, because it's going to be worse than they could ever imagine, and it's going to be worse than you could ever imagine. And it's not something that we should take pleasure in. It should actually provoke us to awe and fear and thankfulness that that's not what we face. Because apart from God's grace, we go the same way and we face the same things. So not fretting is accomplished when we remember when judgment comes, when God will hold people accountable, and it is not here. And at the level that he will hold them accountable, the perfect nature of his wrath, the perfect nature of the destruction of the sinner's soul is awful. It's going to be awful. And we should take no pleasure in it. We should be in awe and fear and thankfulness. So he says, fret not yourselves because of evildoers. Do not be envious. Do not be envious of wrongdoers. The Hebrew word here is the same word that was used to describe how Leah felt towards Rachel. Remember the story of Jacob's two wives, and Rachel kept having all these babies, and Leah wasn't having any babies. Or was that? Or no, it was backwards. Yeah, it was backwards. Sorry. Yep, that's right. That's right. My bad. And so Rachel got really, really jealous of Leah and was mad about it. And it forced her. I mean, she made some poor decisions around that, and it was struggling for her. The other relationship that I think helps describe what it means not to be envious is this is the same word used when of Joseph's brothers towards him. This is how they felt about him because he was the favorite son and he got all the favorite stuff. And they looked at him and they were envious of him. This is the same idea here. And the underlying belief in this envy is that the other person's situation is superior to mine. They got it better than me. That's certainly what Rachel felt about Leah, and that's certainly how Joseph's brothers felt about Joseph, that he was in a much better situation. And not only that, I deserve that, or I should be in that same situation. This isn't what, Emery? Fair. Yeah, there's that word. There's that word. This isn't fair. That's the idea of the envy here. We're not to be envious of who? We're not to be envious of wrongdoers. Well, why? Well, let me back up first. This command's existence instructs us that there is a real danger to this. You might be, well, that's obvious. I shouldn't be envious of wrongdoers. That's easy to say right here, right now, Sunday morning, sitting here together. But the fact that Proverbs 3:31, 23:17, 24:1, 24:19, and way more than I could list right now of verses where there's either warnings or commands not to be envious of wrongdoers tells me that this is an issue that we're going to face, that there is some sort of weakness in our heart and in our flesh that will produce that in us if we're not careful. So the command's existence instructs us there's a real danger, and we must be careful of this. You can't just assume you're not going to do this. And it's a sad irony for those who have been rescued being envious of those who are still in peril. When you think about it, go back just a minute ago, we were talking about what they face, what evildoers face, what their end result of their life will accomplish for them, and what they face in eternity. Why would we be envious of them? It's a sick irony that we would look at someone who has not yet been rescued from the perils that we've been rescued from and say, oh, wish I was in that situation. Well, they got it better than me. How do we see it this way? It's only possible in light of eternity. That's only possible if we're seeing things in the light of eternity. Because it's a lot easier on people. It'll be a lot easier on you in the temporal to go with the flow. Much easier, much more enjoyable. But if we see it in the light of eternity, we understand what the end result is of it. We shouldn't be envious of that. And why isn't it that we should be envious? Like I've already alluded to, it says they will wither and fade. For they will soon fade like the grass and wither like the green herb. The wicked have no hope of eternal security. They have no hope of anything past this life. There is no future promise of blessing for them. Whatever they have is all they get in terms of enjoyment and good. Whatever they do here, whatever they get here, that's it for them. Do you understand that? And I lose sight of that sometimes in thinking about the unbelieving people that I run into, that their lives are not to be envied. They're pitiful. It's a pitiful existence to know, and to be your life to be described as, the summer grass that fades away. Whatever they have is all they gain in terms of enjoyment and good here on earth. In some way, maybe even in pity, we should be glad for them that they find enjoyment or pleasure now, even at our expense, knowing that the end for them is awful. And that really challenged me too, to kind of turn that on my head instead of looking at them and thinking about, I can't wait till they get what they deserve. Maybe my thought should be more like, at least they're going to experience some small measure of God's common grace and the ability to find joy or fulfillment or pleasure in some way, shape, or form, because their eternal existence will be completely devoid of it. Even if it's a good long life, it's like the life of the summer grass in comparison to eternity. Like I've said, it's a pitiful existence to live with no hope beyond this life. Fret not yourselves because of evildoers. Be not envious of wrongdoers, for they will soon fade like the grass and wither like the green herb. Verses 3 and 4, he says, trust in the Lord and do good. Dwell in the land and befriend faithfulness. Delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. Trust in the Lord and do good. Sounds kind of like another passage in Proverbs, fascinatingly enough. Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will direct your path. We're going to come back and talk about this idea of trust because it comes up again later. So we're going to kind of move on from that there. But I want to talk about this is one of the questions as I was studying this passage. What does it mean to do good? What does that mean? How would I define doing good? It's pretty simple. Be obedient. It's not complicated in terms of what it is. Do what is right. That's what it means to do good. As defined by God. I think that's the thing we have to make sure we're understanding. Doing good is as defined by what God defines as good. And this is where, again, we look at the world from an upside down point of view, or better yet, to be more accurate, the world has turned everything upside down from God's economy. And the world, again, I think Pastor Bruce's example of the bat, they live upside down. Every part of the world that they've experienced and existed is upside down from reality. And so understanding that too means that you have to understand and come to grips with that doing good will be unpopular. When he says trust in the Lord and do good, David understands that this isn't one of those things that's just going to be easy to do. He understands that in light of evil existing in the world, in light of evil men, in light of everything going on, it's going to be difficult to do this. That you won't be the right motivation for doing this. Let me say again, the right motivation for doing this is not to make things better here, but because you know what you're called to, and you know where you're going, and you know where your reward and your home lie. This will be unpopular, and as culture becomes more and more dark, the consequences will become more and more difficult and significant as we seek to do good. Again, going back to that upside down reality, we see in our world right now constantly the idea of what is good being defined as evil and what is evil being defined as good. This is the way of the enemy. This is the way of the enemy. Don't fret. Don't fret. Don't get worked up. Instead, delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. What does it mean to delight yourself in the Lord? And again, I would say this is where we begin to put off, if we're not going to fret, what should we do instead? So we're not going to fret, we're going to delight in the Lord. What does that mean? It means we find joy in God and take joy in what he takes joy in. We talked about that last time I was here, up here anyway, not last time I was here, but last time I was up here, remembering that one of the things that we can find joy in is doing what we're created to do, and knowing that when we do what we're supposed to do, that brings God joy. And when God has brought joy, it brings us joy because we're doing what we're supposed to do. We're fulfilling our role. Delighting in God means doing what he commands us with joy because we know that's our purpose. Our goal is not to set things right. Our goal is not to make things right. Our goal is to be obedient, to be humble, to be kind and loving, and to do those things. And as we do those things, as we find that, we will find delight in God. The more aligned we become with God's wills and desires, the more those desires will be fulfilled. That's what he's saying here. Delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. That doesn't mean, a gentleman up front here, that doesn't mean if you're a really good Christian, God's going to give you that really big truck you want or that nice boat. Okay, that's not what he's saying here. It's quite different. The more that we are aligned, the more we become aligned with God's will and his desires, the more those desires are fulfilled in our heart. That it's our job not to try to figure out to get what we want. Our job is to figure out what God wants and to do that and to find delight in that. This isn't about getting what you want out of your relationship with God, but aligning your heart with God's so that his desires become your desires. And what is his desire? His desire is that we live godly lives now while we wait for his return. That's his desire. Listen to Titus 2:11 through 13. For the grace of God has appeared, bringing salvation to all people, training us to renounce ungodliness and worldly passions and to live self-controlled, upright, and godly lives, where? In this present age. Waiting for our blessed hope, the appearing of the glory of our great God and Savior, Jesus Christ. That's our job. We're here to live here now in this present age, waiting on God's glorious appearance. And that's when justice, that's when righteousness, that's when everything gets put right. Verses 5 and 6 says, commit your way to the Lord, trust in him, and he will act. He will bring forth your righteousness as the light and your justice as the noonday. Commit yourself to the Lord. This is an interesting command. What he's saying here is that we have to entrust our decision making to God. We have to commit our way to God. What we're saying here is we're giving up ownership of our decisions and we're devaluating self-determination. Again, that goes contrary to everything that our world teaches us, that we are the masters, that we set our own way, that we decide our path. And what he's saying here is we have to commit, we have to give up our way. We have to say to God, the decisions that you have, the things that you want from my life are the decisions I'm going to make. I'm committing to that and giving those to you. I'm not taking that over. It's the opposite of autonomy when we commit our ways to the Lord. And like I said, this is what the natural man values. It's what he fights for. It's what the world's fighting for, autonomy. I won't be told what to do. I'll do what I want. I know what's best for me. And when you commit your ways to the Lord, what you're saying is, I don't know what's best for me. God does. It is the goal for the natural man. The posture of our lives is one of submission to God's commands, plans, and purposes. That's how we commit our way to the Lord. He works all things for our good. Right? Amen. We know that, right? Romans 8:28. We think about it a lot. We hear it quoted a lot. He works all things together for our good. But that good is not fully promised or realized here on this earth. Our good, the end of good, again, what does God define as good? When we're able to perfectly and completely and eternally be in harmony and relationship with him and with everyone around us. Committing our way to the Lord, it's like taking a path. It's a little bit kind of like a little bit pilgrim progress-ish here. That's not a term. That's not a real word. But the idea is we're committing to a path, knowing that this path is going to lead to valleys and hills and difficulties and dangers. We don't know exactly what they are. We don't know where they are. We don't know when we're going to encounter them. We don't know what they're going to look like. But we know that this path is going to lead us down those things. But here's what we also know, that path leads to its end. That the end of that path is eternal rest and security. That the path is perfect unity and justice and love and goodness and all those things that it will exist in the next life. We know the path's end, and we know as I was reminding myself and you all this morning in our call to worship, we know who holds our hand when we walk that path. That when we commit our ways to the Lord, we're committing ourselves to someone who is loving and kind and will make sure that we never fall headlong in a disastrous way, that path, no matter how difficult, how dark it may become, he's there with us and we will be able to walk through it. And sure, we'll stumble and fall, but he's there to pick us up. So we commit our ways to the Lord, trust in him, and he will act. And he says, trust in him and he will act. And this is where I want to talk about the idea of trust. This is what allows that commitment to the difficult path in the first place. That we trust him, right? That you believe what he says is true. It's the idea of the Hebrew word here is to be confident and sure, or to be bold in action. The negative side of this, the way it's used negatively in the Hebrew, is translated reckless. That got me thinking. You think this word can be used as trust, but it can also be used as reckless in a negative sense, that someone, instead of trusting someone, is being reckless. And how many times has trusting God looked reckless and foolish to the natural man or temporal wisdom? I mean, you think about Abraham, Moses, Joseph, Hananiah, Azariah, Mishael, Daniel, David, Elijah, Mary, Peter, James, John, Jesus, Paul. All of these individuals made decisions and did things that looked absolutely reckless and unwise to the world, but they were trusting in God. It's like Hebrews 11. What did all those individuals have in common in that list I gave you, in the list in Hebrews 11? That they had faith and trust in God. That's what gave them the ability to do the things that they did. To live like eternity is real and that God's promises are true will look reckless to the world, but it is full of trust and faith in God. I thought about, as I was thinking about this, think about what the disciples, try to put yourself in the disciples' shoes. If maybe you never have, I hadn't before, on Saturday after the crucifixion. What a miserable day. That Saturday after the crucifixion, the disciples and the rest of Jesus' followers looked like and probably felt like the biggest chumps in the world. Maybe, I don't know how I would not have in my own flesh been that way. But remember that our circumstances are not the end result and our experiences are not the end outcome. And that just like Sunday came after Saturday, while it may feel like we're on that Saturday right now in some ways, I mean, the world we live in, the culture we live in is dark and getting darker. And justice and right and people that do good and truth, it's hard to find. And it seems to be getting harder to find. And it feels kind of like Saturday, doesn't it? But Sunday is coming and we have to live like Sunday exists. We can't live in Saturday. We have to trust that what is promised will be fulfilled. We have to trust that He will provide righteousness and justice. And it's not necessarily always the way it seems while we're here on earth that that's going to happen. We may not see it at all in this life. And sometimes I think it feels like I experience injustice and evil more than I experience good in some cases. Just looking at the way I act sometimes. I think I commit a lot more evil than I probably do good. Listen to Deuteronomy 7, 9, and 10 says, "Know therefore that the Lord your God is God, the faithful God who keeps covenant and steadfast love with those who love Him and keeps His commandments to 1,000 generations and repays to their face those who hate Him by destroying them. He will not be slack with one who hates Him. He will repay him to His face." It will come. Brothers and sisters, it is not our job to do it. And it is not in this life that we'll experience it perfectly. We have to trust God that His timing, that His plans and His purposes are perfect. And this will help us not to fret, not to be provoked, not to get worked up. He goes on in verse 7, Be still before the Lord and wait patiently for Him. Here's the second. Fret not yourselves over the one who prospers in his way, over the man who carries out evil devices. Be still before the Lord and wait patiently for Him. Psalm 40 verse 1 David says, I waited patiently for the Lord and He inclined to me. He inclined to me and heard my cry. Proverbs 20:22. Do not say, I will repay evil. Wait for the Lord and He will deliver you. Be still before the Lord and wait patiently for Him. Before Him, in His presence, The imagery here is hard to miss in terms of coming into God's presence and becoming still, both quieting both body and soul and mind in humble expectation that the proper response at the proper time from our good and gracious and loving God is coming. That's the idea here. Come, be still before the Lord, before Yahweh. The focus of our being in his presence is to hear from him and to be led by him. It's not to come and be like, this is what's going on, this is what's going on, this is what's going on, there's that, there's this and that, help, help, help. It's to come and quietly, calmly, patiently, sitting and waiting in his presence. The difference between Mary and Martha is a good example of what we saw that in a microcosm. Mary sitting at the feet of Jesus, and Martha running around worried about all those things. Were the things Martha worried about things that need to be taken care of? Probably. Were they most important things? Absolutely not. While we are commanded to make our requests, to cast our cares, ask God for what we need, even in those requests, our posture, the posture of our soul should be one of stillness and patience, knowing that he will do what's best when it is best. Again, I'm not saying, don't hear me say that you don't come to God when you don't come to God and cast your cares on him. You don't come to God and share the anxiety and the things that are on your heart. It's not that you don't do those things, but you come to God when you share those things calmly and quietly in stillness, knowing that God is going to do what he says he's going to do, that the trust that you have is placed in the right person. And he is capable of accomplishing everything that he wants to accomplish for you. Again, he says, do not fret. There are and will continue to be plenty of people who will prosper through evil devices. It's not our job to be concerned with their lives or outcomes. We're not to be provoked to anger by them. Why are we not to be provoked by anger in them? I'm glad you asked, Gabriel. Glad you asked. Because it says here in verse 8 and 9, refrain from anger and forsake wrath. Fret not yourself, it tends only to evil. For the evildoers shall be cut off, but those who wait for the Lord shall inherit the land. Why should we not be provoked to anger? Why shouldn't we respond in anger? Because refrain from anger. Anger is not the answer. We are to give it no place in our response to injustice and evil. James 1:19 and 20. Know this, my beloved brothers, let every person be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger. Why? For the anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God. Why do we refrain from anger? Because it's not going to get you where you think it's going to get you. It's not going to produce for you the thing that you want, or that you think you want. Cultivating and responding in anger does not lead us to doing good. Remember verse 3 says, do good. The angry heart, similar to the envious heart, believes that there's something they deserve that they're not being given. And in this case, it could be that you're just getting angry because you see things going, you see things being done wrong. You see people acting in an evil and selfish and unrighteous way, and you want it to be dealt with. But that's not your place, and that's not your job, and it's not your timing that happens. Sometimes, ultimately, justice is not promised on this earth. Knowing this shouldn't make us angry. We know that. We know that justice is not promised here on earth. It's not. The Bible's clear. It shouldn't anger us. It should deepen our desire and hope for when it does happen, for when the reality of that comes. It should deepen our desire and resolve to walk the path that leads to home. And it also, again, I remind you, should provoke us to pity and love for those who still stand under that judgment to come. That we shouldn't look at the evildoer and be angry at him. He's doing what his nature is. He's the pig in mud. You can't be mad at that. We should love him. We should love them. Anger is the height. A response to the evildoer is the height of hypocrisy. An angry response to the evildoer is the height of hypocrisy. Ephesians 2, 1 through 4, and you were dead in your trespasses and sins in which you once walked, following the course of this world, following the prince of the power of air, the spirit that now is at work in the sons of disobedience, among whom we all once lived in the passions of our flesh, carrying out the desires of the body and mind, and were by nature children of wrath, like the rest of mankind. But God, being rich in mercy, because of the great love with which he loved us. We cannot be angry, brothers and sisters. Anger is not the response to seeing the evil in the world. They're being who they are, and we were one of them. Being angry at evildoers comes from the same heart that was in the unforgiving servant as he attacked the man that owed him infinitely less than what he had just been forgiven of. Refrain from anger and forsake wrath. The Hebrew term here is to leave. It literally means leave it unexercised. Wrath is going to be available to you as an option. Don't make use of it. Leave it unexercised. This takes preparation because it's always available to us. In the heat of the moment, it's the closest and most attractive of tools available, isn't it? When you're being provoked, when you're fretting, wrath is hanging around right there. It's that close that when you reach back for the tool to respond to it, the first thing the flesh is going to grab every single time is wrath. Forsake it. Leave it unexercised. Again, keep in mind when and from whom ultimate justice and judgment are to come. It's not us. Wrath is kind of that outward expression of the inward anger. What are you going to do? Make it worse. That's what you're going to do. The only thing you can do if you're going to respond in anger to selfishness, unrighteousness, injustice, evil, you're only going to make it worse. Two wrongs don't make it right. Anger plus anger equal just 2 times as much anger. This is where trust and faith come in, believing that God will do what he says he'll do and remembering that you're incapable of doing it yourself. And it is not this life where these things will be accomplished perfectly. Again, in the last time he says for the third time and the last time in the Psalm, he says, fret not yourself. Fret not yourself. Why? It tends only to what? Evil. There's why. An angry response to evil leads you down the path of evil. The irony of those who give in to an angry or wrathful response towards injustice or apparent success of evil men is that your heart is engaged in the same self-protection and self-concern as those who are engaged in those evil practices. You're just like them. The anger of man does not produce the righteousness that God desires. As you feed that anger and selfish rage, your actions will reflect those that you have been enraged by. And what does Jesus say? You have heard it said to you, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist the one who is evil. But if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. If anyone would sue you to take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, you go with him 2 miles. Give to the one who begs of you, and do not refuse those who borrow from you. What does he say again, though? Verse 39, I say to you, do not resist the one who is evil. It's not our job to resist evil. Our job is to do good. Delight in God. It doesn't mean you don't call it for what it is. It doesn't mean that you don't stand up in certain situations. The idea here is that it's not It's not our job, or it's not even our capability to defeat evil. That is God's. He will deal with it. Finally, verse 9. For the evildoers shall be cut off, but those who wait for the Lord shall inherit the land. Those who hope in Yahweh will inherit the land. This is a future tense, future promise, different land than we're in, than they're in. To put your hope in Yahweh means that you're trusting His purposes and His plans and His timing. You believe through how you act that God has a plan to remedy this mess. It's a mess, but God has a plan to remedy this. And His plan is perfect. And when He does, it will also be perfect. If it hasn't happened yet, there's a good reason why. I don't know what it is. I'm not trying to figure that out. But if it hasn't happened yet, there's a reason why. God has yet to do that. But God will. And this isn't apparent all the time. Again, remember, sometimes I think a lot of times more and more I feel like I'm sitting here on Saturday between the crucifixion and the resurrection. It's bad. But Sunday is coming. God is coming, and He will make all things right in His time and in His way. This is a promise from the Creator and Sustainer of all things. We will inherit the land. We have a home, and He will take us there. Live like that is true. Let's pray. God, thank you for the truth of your word. Lord, thank you that you are perfectly and completely trustworthy. God, thank you that you walk with us. Lord, forgive us for how easily we give in, give up, become distracted, lose focus. Lord, help us not to be people of anger, but people of love. God, we look forward to the day when you set things right and make all things new. Lord, those that we love that don't know you, Lord, please rescue them from the wrath to come. Lord, please help us, give us a deep love for the lost, and help it motivate us to call to them, to live right, to give an answer. God, thank you. In your name I pray. Amen.